as a person who's supposed to look at the numbers, sometimes it's hard to know how to evaluate the figures, because we get a lot of numbers about clients, about demographic information and so on, and how are we supposed to determine what it means. So partly a lot of it has to do with comparisons to last year. How's it changing? But one thing I did in this first slide is I took a number of these different programs, and I wanted to compare the proportions of clients at the board level. So the board level includes Simcoe and Muskoka. Compares it and compare it to the region level. So the region is the central region. The ministry includes Peel, Halton, Toronto, Durham, York, and Simcoe and Muskoka into the central region, and then we have Ontario figures, okay? And so at the top is a calculation of what share does this area represent in terms of population. Okay, so Simcoe and Muskoka have 4% of Ontario's population. Okay, so that I'm using that as a bit of a guide. Now we're looking at all these other programs. Okay, so EO unassisted. So there you see there's around 18,500. So last year, 2016, 2017, in this area, there were 18,500 EO unassisted. That represented 3.8% of the provincial client numbers for that category. Okay, so just a shade smaller than in comparison to what the population share is. Okay, so that's the only kind of measure I can suggest to you in terms of trying to understand the numbers. So we're going to go through the list. So EO assisted, those 6,004, that represented 3.1%. So even more slightly lower than the 4% population. Right? Second career, actually lower yet. So 148, and I put all these figures up here because sometimes I think it's good to see them in terms of the global numbers. You know, imagine like EO unassisted, we have almost 500,000 in Ontario. EO assisted, we have 190,000. Second career, 7,000 in Ontario. So here in this area, 148, they represent 2.1% of the client base. Canada Ontario Jobs Grant, that was very close, 3.9%, very close to the provincial residential share. Apprenticeship new registrations, 3.6%. Youth Job Connect, 3.2%. The only figure where you were above your ratio compared to the province was in literacy and basic skills. So 5.5%. So the literacy and basic skill numbers, in-person learners, represents 5.5% of the provincial client numbers. So the only instance where your numbers are higher than your share of population. In some instances, one can compare it to the share of unemployed. I think I might have a slide on that. In others, I don't know anything else to compare it to in terms of trying to give you a yardstick to make a measurement. Okay? But in any case, again, you will have these slides, so you'll see those numbers. So, so now we're going to go through some of these different programs just to show some comparisons. So unassisted employment services clients, as I said, last year your numbers represented 3.8% of the Ontario figures, slightly higher from the year before. So actually that did go up a bit. For the assisted clients, I actually put up 4 years of figures here. So 3 years of figures. So again, it's been pretty consistent. 2014, 2015, your client numbers represented 3.3%. Again, the next year 3.3%, and this year 3.1%. you'll also see that for everywhere, the actual number of clients is going down. Okay, so in Ontario, went down from 201,000 to 194,000 to this year's 190,000. Same thing for the region and same thing for the board. So everyone's seeing a decline in client numbers for employment assisted. That's not it's the other way around for unassisted. The unassisted numbers have gone up quite a lot, actually, almost like 20%. I have no idea what it means. I think you're going to have to tell me. Anyone know why that is? Like, why the unassisted numbers have gone up so much, and why the, yeah?
I feel like it's just part of a broader trend of people doing more independent searching in general in society, like for their own real estate. I know they see it in that industry, for their own like financial
things. Yeah.
You know, people are a little more self-directed now than they used to be.
Huh.
Plus the assisted is based on a target that we have to attain.
Right.
Right? Like if we have to hit 600, then we're shooting for 600.
Right.
Well, we have a lot of clients who are coming in and using the resource information to print, fax, photocopy, even just to chat with the team members, but are fully functioning in their own job search and getting their own jobs, but have been past clients that have benefited from this service. And then, of course, the video clients as well that annually.
The other factor too would be, I think, is the impact of the Youth Job Connection program in terms of taking a percentage of youth who may have accessed ES in the past as assisted, who come in through unassisted R&I, but end up going over to another program, not into employment services.
Okay, so they don't get counted as assisted.
That's correct. They go to another program. Yeah.
I was going to say too, I've been doing job development for a number of years, and when I got into it, I spent most of my time actually physically going to employers, handing out paper copies of resumes or faxing resumes to employers. And now everything is done electronically, and people have that capacity within their homes to do that. So they can come in the resource center and sit at a computer or do it from their phone or their tablet at home. Whereas, 10 years ago they could do that. They needed to go to somewhere where there was a fax machine, so they were coming
in. All right. Okay, so interesting. We mentioned youth because here's the breakdown by age for ES assisted, and I have 3 years of data. So on the, this is the figures. This is where I compare it to actually not the population. I don't compare the percentage by age to what their share is of the general population. I compare to what their share is of the unemployed. But I only have, I don't have that, we can't get that data for the local area, but let's just take at the top. So in Ontario, let's go right to the far right of the slide. So youth make up around 31% of the unemployed in Ontario, and the 25 to 44-year-olds make up 37%. Okay, so that's kind of the benchmark, and I have the figures for the previous years there. That hasn't changed much, but the client numbers change. So in 2014, in the bottom, 15 to 24-year-olds in the local area, Simcoe and Muskoka, they made up 29% of the clients, whereas they made up around 32% of the unemployed. The next year they made up 27%, so it went down, and this year it's actually 22%. So it fell a fair bit. I know years back the youth numbers went up a bit, percentages, and now they've started dropping again. Now it could be as that they're being taken up by some other programs, but but again, it's not a pattern that's unique to just you. Everyone, if you look at the region level, the board level, the share of youth has dropped, even though their share of unemployed has hardly dropped. Okay? Yeah?
Could this be reflective of educational trends too, though? Like, I know in Aurelia, we see youth are staying in high school now, more in Aurelia, whereas we have a strong clientele base who are now mid-late 20s into 30s who did not finish high school. So we would have been able to take them on as youth, but when they are in high school full-time or in college full-time, can't really take them into assisted.
Yeah, but so they're not reflected in the unemployment numbers. So that's because the unemployment numbers are only those who are participating in the labor force. So if you're in school, so just by just in comparison to their share of the unemployed, they still make up a smaller share of your client base.
But year over year, I just mean, like, if youth are staying in school longer, then
That's certainly so. There are fewer youth who are. There's a smaller share of youth who are, in terms of numbers, who are unemployed, but the percentage of the unemployed is still high, and the percentage they make up of the unemployment is still high. So, yeah, no, I don't think it's the education. I think the education accounts for some other things in terms of some of the jobs. Yeah.
I was going to say that just in Muskoka alone, I think there's 5 different youth programs that are currently running. So I think it has a lot to do with government funding a lot of youth programs that aren't necessarily captured in regular employment services programs.
Yeah, I think that's. I think it's just. Yeah, I think we have been seeing more programming. Yeah, that they're taking up some of those numbers. Okay. Just by gender, nothing really much to say here. It's almost equal. The changes have been very, very, very minor in terms of either the proportion. First of all, males make up slightly more of the unemployed in Ontario, at least. So 54% of the unemployed are males, as opposed, whereas clients, it's roughly equal. But it's only a difference of 2 or 3 percentage points, so nothing particular. We have this thing about the designated groups. The only thing, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, except to say that it would appear that newcomers make slightly greater use of employment services than their share of the unemployed. Okay. Certainly that's the case in the local area. So in the local area, newcomers, who are a small percentage of your population, but they make up around 1.3% of your unemployed, and they make up 2.8% of your client base. And the representation among Aboriginals has been increasing steadily. Again, not only at the local level, but across everywhere. So it would appear that more Aboriginal people are making use of employment services, still though in smaller portions of their share of the unemployed. And I don't really comment on the visible minority thing, because those figures really get out of whack because this is self-reported. I think we've had this conversation before, and in Toronto it just makes the statistics don't reflect the reality. This is internationally trained professionals. So you've had a very consistent pattern year after year. Around 5% of your clients are internationally trained professionals. I put up all the central region for comparison, so you'll see that in Peel-Halton, 39% of their clients are internationally trained professionals. So imagine what that does in terms of, I'll get to this figure in a moment, because what it means is that they've all got university degrees. So they got a huge number, quite different from almost anywhere else outside the Toronto area, where you have traditionally lower portions of people with university degrees among your client group. And over there, they've got, as I said, just off the bat, 39% are internationally trained professionals. And so here's by educational attainment. So The unemployed in Ontario, around 24% of the unemployed have a university degree. Okay? In your area, 10% of your clients have a university degree. Okay? In the region, it's 37%. But again, the region, you're in the wrong region. I'm sorry to tell you. Okay? Like, it just makes no sense to compare you to York, Durham, Toronto, Peel, and Halton, because that number is entirely driven by, first of all, the high concentration of university-level jobs, university-level graduates, and internationally trained professionals. Totally distorts the figures. Okay. So you have a much higher proportion of clients who have either a high school diploma or a college or apprenticeship certificate. And by length of time unemployed, I was showing you that stat that we are seeing a much higher portion of people staying unemployed for a longer period of time, or continuing to stay unemployed. But that being said, your numbers have gone down slightly, and it's gone down everywhere, just very slightly. Only now 20% of your clients have been unemployed for 12 months or more, whereas last year it was 23%. So just a small shift, but still notable. Okay. And outcomes, so 72% employed outcome. You're doing better than elsewhere. So I'm sure you all got bonuses. And the breakdown by the employment numbers by outcomes, you see they've changed now some of the categories. So now we have employed other, includes all that other category of in a job that was tied to their training and in a professional job. You remember those categories? So those have now been put into an employed other category, which makes it harder to now make the comparison. So at that top line, for example, last year 60% of your employment outcomes were employed full-time, and this year it's 46%. Well, your numbers haven't gone down because you have a better category to choose now. You can down below, and so some of the figures have migrated. So I showed this slide only to say that there's nothing to tell you here because we're comparing apples and oranges now. So we have information. Of course, we know where people are laid off from, and we also know where they end up being employed. I'm just showing this to show that we're getting more data from you. Okay, so last year, for 65% of the clients, we had industry layoff data, and now we have it for 73%. So that increased. So that was good for the layoff data, but what was really good was that we got more data for the where they were getting jobs, okay, what their employment outcomes were. So that went up from 12% to 29%, and in terms of Ontario, it went from 7% to 20%. All of which it meant we were able to kind of look at the numbers a bit more in terms of what's happening to people. And so that's what I'm going to. I got one more slide before I get there. This was just to compare by industry where people were being laid off from and where they were getting their outcomes, and comparing that to where the jobs are, where the vacancies are. So the point I'm going to make here is, not surprisingly, your people are being laid off from construction and they're finding work in construction, like around roughly 10%. Same thing with manufacturing, and retail trade very high, 15% being laid off and 19% finding work in retail. So you have around 3 industries that are quite prominent. Sorry, and I'm going to mention the fourth in a moment. Those are the 3 industries. The fourth one that I think is problematic is that we still have this business building and other support. That includes the administrative and support industry category, which I mentioned it before. That's call centers and janitorial services and landscaping services and temp agencies. We continue to have a higher proportion of people finding jobs in those areas, and I'm just going to put it out to you that it seems to me those are precarious jobs. They represent actually 5% of employment, but around 12% of clients, that's where they're ending up. So there's a mismatch there. So some of this is probably more relevant to Toronto, but I think it's important to show this up because I've put together, we don't really often know what's happening in terms of the big picture. Okay, now, so what I've got here, so to the far left, I've taken everyone who's employed in the Toronto CMA, and let's assume, yeah, so, because I don't have the figures for the central region. So everyone who's employed, this is their breakdown in terms of their education. And so the orange is university, so 43% of people who are employed have a university degree, 23% have a college, that green, 6% is have some post-secondary, 16% have a high school, and 7% have no certificate, okay? So that's everyone who's employed. The next one is the unemployed. So yeah, they have, those with university degree make up a slightly smaller portion of people who are unemployed. Okay, they make up 34%, but still a good chunk of the unemployed have a university degree. The third one is the EO clients. That's their education breakdown. So surprisingly, they actually have slightly higher education than the general unemployed population. Okay, don't know why. And the last one is, that's where job vacancies are. This is the breakdown of the jobs. What are the educational requirements of the job vacancies? So I took all the job postings in the job vacancy survey and assembled them by the educational requirement of that occupation. So we have, again, even if we manage to put everybody in a job, we're going to end up having people who are working at a level below their education. Our unemployed are still have higher levels of education than where the job openings are. Okay. Now that's their educational levels. Okay, now the next one, again, so the first one is the level of education of people who are employed. The second one is the level of education of the jobs they are employed in. Okay, so already the people who are employed already are working, but we've already got a surplus of people with university degrees because we don't have the share of jobs for that level of education. These are the unemployed, their level of education. These are the jobs they came from. Okay, so those who are unemployed were already actually working in jobs, even worse jobs than their level of education compared to those who are employed. Okay, so they already, I think those who end up unemployed may already have some issues, including coming from jobs that weren't commensurate with their level of education. Okay, with me so far? Okay. Now, here are the EO numbers. So the first one is a level of education of these EO clients. The next one is the jobs they were laid off from. You see what a huge fall off? They're already coming, the jobs they were laid off from were significantly lower than their levels of education. Now, these are the jobs they ended up in. These are the outcomes. Now, I'm going to say these aren't perfect figures because what I don't have, The layoff figures don't include youth, a lot of youth, right? And a lot of people who would have come without a layoff. So, and if we're putting place in some of those numbers, especially if some of those youth are ending up in service sector jobs, they're going to increase those blue and yellow figures. But the overall trend, so we've got our employed are in jobs that are somewhat lower than their levels of education on average. Our unemployed in particular are in jobs that are lower than their level of education. Our EO clients are even more so. They are already coming to you, I'm sorry to say, they're coming to you as damaged goods. Okay? And a lot of the programming you have, what's the employer going to do? The employer's going to say, so what was your last job? You're lucky if you can get them into something that they were in before. And so that's why we have these figures. So, I think there's, and you wonder why you go home at night and you have an upset stomach. This is really anxiety provoking, because you're working in a system and the way of what you're being asked to do is just, you're not going to get many success stories. And when you do, I know you do get it, but I know there's, we have a lot of anecdotal stories about, those great connections you've made for people. But overall, the system is not helping you help these people. This is what, for me, the data shows, and I just want you to understand that it's not, it's about what jobs are available out there. We just don't have, the jobs do not match what these people could do. But that being said, I will make one comment that the educational attainment does not always reflect their abilities and may over-reflect their abilities. If we sort people by literacy scoring, then we get a completely different results here. And you will know, and it's certainly the data shows this, that we have a lot of people, even with university degrees, who score 1 or 2 on the literacy scale of the 1 to 5 literacy scale. So there's something else at play here, and that's how they're getting sorted out. That's why they're also ending up often in those lousy jobs. Number one, we don't have all the jobs, but the employers are doing that kind of sorting. But these are individuals that, with more support, whether it's pre-employment programs, soft skills support, training, vocational and technical training, could access a better job. But right now, all our system is largely able to do is help them in terms of this revolving door going back to where they came from. Okay.
What does job skill level mean on there? What's that being
Oh,
based on?
so this is on these the skill of the job. So this is the what is the skill required for that job? So these are jobs that only 17. They're coming from occupations of which only 17% of the jobs required a university degree, or 29% required a college degree. Okay, so most of the jobs that came from required a high school diploma. Well, half, right? Over half of the jobs. So here, this is their level of university and college education, but most of them are in these jobs, and the outcomes, around 60% are in jobs that required a high school diploma or less.
How do you know the educational requirements of the jobs people were coming from?
Because we know their occupation, the occupation. Okay, so the knock code. So the first digit tells you the category of job, like it's a manager job or a business or health occupation, or like manufacturing is 9. The second digit, now the way the numbers, the way the knock is now organized is the second digit tells you the level of education. So if it's a 0 or 1, it's university. If it's a 2 or 3, it's college or apprenticeship. 4 or 5 is high school, and 6 or 7 is no. Okay. So like a cashier is 66, I think. No, sorry, 661 or 6611. So the first 6 says it's service sector. Second 6 says it's a job that doesn't require any educational attainment. Yeah. A retail salesperson, like I think, is 6'4" or something. So 4 is high school. Yeah.
This is a central region. How different do you think that this picture would look if you took out internationally trained?
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, so I think the internationally trained really goose up those figures, but not entirely. Okay, but yes, they definitely do. Absolutely. So here's the Simcoe figures, by the way. Now I don't have as much. So this is the level of jobs. Yeah, so this is not the education level, but the level of jobs. So first of all is the people who are employed. So this is Simcoe and Muskoka, sorry. Right? So around 25% of everyone who works in Simcoe and Muskoka has a university degree. See the much higher number of college jobs. Okay, but the unemployed here. And these are the jobs that the EO clients came from. Sorry, these are the jobs, so this is the education level of your clients, right? Remember we said 10% of university degree? But these are the jobs they came from. So you can see especially, look at 30% of them came, 30% of them came from jobs that required no educational background. But only 15% of them have that level of education. Okay, so they're already coming from lousy jobs. Here the high school jobs are about equivalent. You know, like 40 and 37 is close enough. College jobs pretty close. This is where the big difference is. They're coming from their food counter attendants and their cashiers and so on. You know, really the top line point here is that you have a higher portion. You represent a higher portion of the LBS learners. Let me get into some of the other LBS slides. Your figures in terms of age are pretty close to everyone else in terms of your highest population is at 25 to 44-year-olds. Females definitely make up a larger portion, but again, not hugely different, 54% to 46%. By educational attainment, this is, almost half the clients do not have a high school diploma. You have a higher rate of that than elsewhere. Very few with post-secondary, not surprisingly. Learner path goals, again, not, less seeking post-secondary, more seeking secondary credit. But again, that reflects, what base they're starting from. Okay, second career. I think I don't know why your figures are lower, because particularly, when I was saying that you have an economy that is more geared towards college and apprenticeship type occupations and industries, that I would have thought your second career numbers would be higher. So I'm curious. I don't know if anyone has a theory for why proportionately you have a smaller share of second career than you should.
My guesstimate would be around the lower skill levels in the jobs. So typically then the wages are lower. And second career has the 3 requirements, with the first being the layoff requirement and then the suitability. And suitability to score the 16 requires those length of time out of the labor force. And most people who aren't well-resourced can't be out of the labor force long enough to meet the suitability requirements.
And I'll also add that because Muskoka is very seasonal, I work with clients on applications. They more often than not will return to a seasonal job before they continue with an application. And then also that there's not as much access to training. Just accessible in-class training.
Yeah.
So that becomes a challenge as well.
And I find that because the parameters of obtaining OSAP have changed, I would say the vast majority of the clients are going back to school with OSAP grants versus loans.
Interesting.
And it's easily accessible versus second career because there's not those 3 levels of criteria.
Okay. All right, thanks. That's helpful. By age, again, not surprising, most are 25 to 44-year-olds, half of them are. Slightly higher proportion of males. These figures haven't changed from last year. By education, you definitely have many more people just with a high school diploma and college. You have no one with a university degree, whereas that look at the region. The region has around a fifth, 1 out of 5 of their clients. Second career approved skills training. Because of the small numbers, the data is suppressed for any cell that has less than 10, so that's why we're only able to show the top 3. Once again, the top second career training program in the province is transport truck driver, which just drives me crazy. It equals the next 3. So heavy equipment operator, social and community service worker, and a home support worker combined is the same as the number of people we're putting into trucks. Okay, apprenticeships. Again, I would have thought you'd have higher apprenticeship numbers. Yes, they're going to be younger, far more males. 80% of apprentices are males. Okay, so here are the 10 top trades that they're choosing. Okay, so there's really, in terms of the trades that are chosen between here and the region and the province, remarkable amount of similarity. Just slightly, sometimes differences in terms of what's number 1 or number 2, but it really doesn't make that much difference. Of the top 10 trades in your area, only 2 are not also the top 10 in the region or the province, and those 2 are general machinist and cook. Okay. Canada-Ontario job grant. So a good portion, 70% of these job grants going to employers with less than 50 employees. And that's just slightly higher than anywhere else, than in the other areas, but not much, not a big thing. In terms of the training provider, this one, so everywhere across the province, around a third of the training providers are private career colleges. Now, I know some private career colleges do good work. I'm always a bit skeptical of private career colleges, so it troubles me a bit that a third of this is going to them. It troubles me that our public colleges are taking up such a small percentage. Even here in this area, 15% is being taken up by by the public college, and the universities aren't on the map. Product vendors as well. So a lot of this is really being taken up by private providers. And when product vendors are the ones who, like half of them, so they're basically, thinking how this is getting done, folks. You got a supplier who says, I'm going to sell you this machinery, and I can get you funding for the training. All right. Then the participants by age really just reflect it's really who's in the workforce, right? Because this is all although I think there are some component of COJB can also include people who are being hired, but essentially it's targeted to people who already are working. So it's going to reflect the profile of the workforce, and so that's why we have this age distribution. So we covered off labor market data and the Employment Ontario stats, and I had a chance to speak from a soapbox for a few minutes. So thank you. But I'm happy to take any other questions. I think we still got a couple of minutes. You know, I work in this field, and I'm struck how little we ever invested in trying to figure out what was happening to the changing market. But I will say that has changed. I mean, certainly there are far more local groups, like whether it's the Mowat Center or the Martin Institute, or, you know, that more people are generating studies. That's the first thing. I will also credit the province for starting to move more, or starting to look to make more investments in workforce development as opposed to employment services. So, you know, the expansion of the workforce planning boards into these local employment planning councils actually was a good step. The sector strategy partnership grants was a good step. Those of us who took those on, it was all a learning process, and the learning curve is still pretty steep before it's going to get there. So I think those have been good. But you're right. I mean, you know, the stats. I've done these presentations for around 4 years ago, for 4 years now, and it's always like everything I hear from the service providers is always the same thing. Like, you guys know what's wrong with the way the thing is structured, and I don't understand why the ministry doesn't use that. You know, there really is a serious disconnect between how the programs are designed and the people who have the on-the-ground knowledge of what's required. You know, so I will say they've done some good things. I think, you know, I'm really disappointed that Second Career has kind of fallen off. And, you know, when it started, I think it offered some great promise. And now that it's a training program for truck drivers, you know, I think this, you know, is an issue. So I encourage you to run in the next election. I'm going to say the one thing I think that still hasn't penetrated is that I think the government policy does not acknowledge the degree to which these challenges are created by the employers. Yes, I understand the clients need various supports and help, but first of all, you know, the numbers show that there's a disconnect already. You know, people have responded in terms of improving their game on the education side. That's not to say it's always equivalent, but employers are choosing business models that actually make it harder for people to develop careers, to access the kind that the emphasis now is that people have to be job ready as opposed to being trained on the job and all that kind of stuff. So that those changes in our labor market are what are created these challenges. And I think governments in particular are very hesitant to call out employers on that stuff. I don't think it's a criticism, because I think they would be better employers if they had better HR practices and invested more. I think it would be better for the economy. I think so. But I think we're hesitant to question the choices that employers make.
Do you think the recent change made to the COJG, which is lowering, I believe it's to 1/6 participation that the employer has to contribute, that will make a change? Because if it was too tough for them to actually participate in the program, and at the higher level with perhaps employers who have more employees and have more money and they're going to pick up 2/3, then doesn't that open up the possibilities for a whole new group of people?
Okay, but here's the thing. I mean, because again, we're educating people, and so it's not only the supply side. It's like, oh, if we just improve the worker, it's going to result in something better. The next question is, well, what are you going to use those skills for? It probably means you've got to change some of your operations, and it's not just your machinery. It probably means you have to move from one style of doing things to another style. Okay, so I think that so I think a lot of this is for show. I think I don't think there's necessarily evidence that this is improving productivity and so on. If it were tied to changes in terms of how the place operates, and that there's take-up, and that there's of those skills, and that there's career ladders, and there's opportunities for progression. But again, this is where the government doesn't think about what's happening inside that black box. It's like, I think they're saying they don't find trained workers, or that they're looking, so if we give them money for training, it's going to happen. But it's training for what? I'm skeptical, I guess.
It's a really, sorry to interrupt, it's a really good point, because we were just saying the majority of applications, speaking for us, that we see from employers, and I'm really glad to hear you say the business model is rarely do we see an increase in wages for the employees.
Yeah.
We have to coach around that.
Yeah. Now, I mean, thankfully, I mean, at least we're now, I think we are starting to see a bit of a demographic crunch with the aging population, and with the higher level of education that people have. I think employers are going to be forced. I just can't see how they can get around not increasing wages, especially for entry-level positions. I know they're squawking about the minimum wage thing, but I'm certainly we're seeing in Peel and Halton in the manufacturing and warehousing sector, they're starting. They're above minimum wage, and they're raising their wages because they can't get workers. So, but still, that's not to say, I think on the training side, there's got to be a much more of a it's got to treat both sides. It's not just ensuring there's a supply of trained workers. The training has to apply to something. I'm going to give a stupid example, but like we can train people in customer service, but if they go work for Walmart, what's the difference? If you go to a store that doesn't use customer service as one of their selling points, then the training's unnecessary. I'm sorry to upset any Walmart fans here, but like other stores would, but those stores, they operate. It's partly a culture, but it's also partly they ensure that their staff are cross-trained, so they do perform many functions. They rely on their staff to understand what products are being asked for. So like it's part of your job to kind of note, someone noticed that this product was missing. So there's, or they're asking about why we stopped continuing this brand. So, a place like Costco is much more in tune to their customer base. But that's, so the training someone to be a really good cashier or shelf stocker is about those kinds of things. And if you don't have those operational practices, the training doesn't make a difference. So that's why I say training in the abstract of ensuring that the operational practices are changing. So it's got to be both.
I guess I look at it as the smaller organization that might be able to take advantage of the COJG because their share of cost is not going to be as high, are certainly more reachable, at least from my perspective. On a community basis, they're a lot more reachable and will listen to the type of training that any one of us could provide, rather than one of those like product vendor or the private career college, that sort of thing. So that's where I see perhaps some potential. But we don't get involved. I'm in LDS. We don't really ever see much of COJG action at all. But this is where I think if we can target, and we have, that's why I'm bringing it up. I thought it was really kind of exciting, this news. Highly educated people in some employment areas that really do not have some very identifiable skills that are required in their jobs. And because of the changing model of a lot of employers too, where people who are on a line are now moving into a team leader position, the people we have can't read the reports, they can't complete the reports, but they're being moved up. And now they've hit a plateau and they're afraid for their jobs because they can't complete the rest of the part. So we worked with the employer because now they can, it's cheaper for them to participate in this. That's a very identifiable thing that can be assisted with.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to deal with a great big huge employer. You know, it's just, they say they do this training in-house, but there's such a lack of training on behalf of employers anyway. I just see it as perhaps more reachable, the smaller employer.
Yeah. On the other hand, then I would, though, with a larger employer, I would be trying to see if there's a possibility to encourage a systemic change, where right. So creating an ongoing relationship with a community college around a training program or something. Or there's a career advancement program that continuous training over time for advancement to better jobs.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's a different groundswell because our services are free anyway. We don't have, and that's what we've always said in LDS. Well, okay, spend all this money. All these services are free now.
Yeah.
So, but that I think is a good for some employers to be able to.
I agree.
And one other question: whoever came up with the age categories for all these programs?
Yeah.
So youth is 15 to 24 and this, but if you look at what our CAMS data is, it's not. Our age breaks, for people are not the same.
I think it goes back to when these programs were separate, because the feds had it to 24 and you had it to 29, I think, under the Youth Job Connect, the old system. Anyway, because I know when they started integrating it, and whereas Statistics Canada, for example, is all 19 to 24, so that's why we report the numbers that way, because that's what we can compare to. When we first got the numbers, we had it to 29. We had your numbers from 15 to 29, but we had no way to compare it because the Stats Can numbers didn't give us. That wasn't where the age break was. So it's the feds it's a federal age break at 24. Yeah.
But even all the rest of them, because Stephanie's not there. I know when we're going over our data. Oh, there. Stephanie, what's the age? Well, you probably don't know off the top of your head, but how close is our age break, our categories for LBS and CAMS, to all these other stats? Do they match? Or do you guys have to try and figure that out when you're doing your annual?
We just work with the LDS stats.
Okay, so there's not a direct comparison, I don't think.
No, and none of our
It can't
stats
be.
are, we go below like 18 or less. We don't, because most of our clients
Even
in LDS
30,
have to
40,
be
40,
out of
those.
school.
Yeah.
So they're generally 17 or 18 or up. We're really only supposed to take 19, but there's exceptions. So, but we follow whatever the CAMS data is now, so I think it's
Okay.
similar, but it's not, it doesn't match necessarily with the federal breaks in Statistics Canada information.
But it's not just youth. I'll wait until I get the slides like I did last year, and then I'll send you an email. We had a discussion last year about apprenticeship versus GED, and the GED people having to go into the apprenticeship numbers because there is no GED category and it doesn't count as grade 12. So those apprenticeship numbers too, I think they're worse.
All right. Okay, so I think we've come to the end, but I'll be around for a few minutes if people want to ask me a question. Okay. All right. Thanks.